My kingdom has just signed up for their KvK, and this is not going to be any normal KvK. This is going to be a recovery KvK. And in today's video, I'm going to explain what a recovery KvK is, why they are good, why they are bad, and if you should even consider doing a recovery KvK. Because some people say these are the trick to any good kingdom, and others say that these will kill a kingdom. So if you want to know all about recovery KvKs, what I think of them, and if you should even consider doing one, you need to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off by answering a fairly simple question. What is a recovery KvK? A lot of people might be asking that right now, because it is a little bit of a strange term, and a recovery KvK really just means one of two things. The first one is it's a KvK where your kingdom just does not fight. Your kingdom just chooses to stay in zone 4, farm speed ups just for a future KvK that is probably going to be bigger than the recovery format. So that's one form of a recovery KvK. Another one that people call a recovery, and this is not really a recovery KvK, is what I like to call a recovery by accident. It's a KvK where you're matched up against dumb, easy opponents, and your kingdom or your camp just fully steamrolls those opponents. So no matter what you guys do, it wasn't really a deliberate recovery KvK, but you just win the KvK so easily that really it ends up being a recovery. And the point of these KvKs is to really do what's in the name, help you recover. That means train troops, get speed ups, get resources. So the less fighting in a recovery KvK, the better for your recovery itself. So that is the simplest form really of what a recovery KvK is, and you'll notice that often kingdoms will do these after they have a massive KvK. There are a few things also about recovery KvKs. There are some formats which are pretty good for them, and there are some which are pretty bad. Often when you're looking for recovery KvKs, you want to choose a more dead format if we're being fully real. We signed up for Tides of the War. I'm not sure our reasoning behind this. I think it's because there is a safe zone 4, so we can stay there the whole time. But if I'm not mistaken, there are other KvKs which can also be pretty good for recovery. KvKs such as Strife of the 8, because as you can see, there are so many kingdoms in here that if you do get into one, if your kingdom isn't active, it's really not a big deal. Other KvKs can include Desert Conquest, which doesn't really run anymore. King of the Nile was one that our kingdom was going to sign up for, but it didn't come around this registration, and it would have probably been a good recovery as well, just because, again, it's got a lock zone 4, if I'm not mistaken. And then we also are doing the Tides of the War as our other recovery. There are some KvKs which aren't very good for recovery, big one being Heroic Anthem. This is a fighting KvK if you're being fully real. You have to fight to actually be able to do anything in that KvK, so this KvK, bad for recovery. And also, if I'm not mistaken, the Siege of Orleans one is pretty bad. And also, Warriors Unbound. When I did it, I'm pretty sure this one wasn't the most recovery-ish, if I'm going to be fully honest. But those would be like some formats which you can definitely get away with a bit of a recovery KvK. Strife of the 8, I mean, this is just an example of mostly dead kingdoms, except 103, they're probably in a recovery right now. So you can definitely get away running recovery KvKs here, and any kingdom in here, really, if they've signed up for Strife of the 8, they're probably doing a recovery. Like, I mean, look at the number of kingdoms in here. There's like 50 or 60, probably not 50, it's probably like 30 to 40, and I reckon at least one or two of them is in a recovery KvK. The next thing I would like to talk about when it comes to recovery are the advantages and disadvantages of the format. And I'll start off with the advantages of a recovery KvK. And the first thing that's really good is, well, it literally does allow you to recover. It allows your accounts to get speed ups, get resources, and train troops again. Because I can say, after our last KvK against 1568, our kingdom is fairly drained for resources and speed ups. I'm kind of an exception when you look at my account, just because it is a small account. I can just get tons of speed ups and resources, and I don't need that many for a KvK, but I know a lot of our bigger players, like the whale accounts, are much more drained than my account is. So that means our king has decided we should go for a KvK that is a little bit more relaxed, a little bit less fighting, in the hopes of regaining our resources. That was really the main goal of this. And the point of a recovery KvK is to facilitate getting more resources, getting more speed ups, and training your troops back. So if a kingdom goes for a recovery, the point is to, well, recover the accounts. And that's definitely the biggest advantage of them, especially since being able to recover means your kingdom will do better in the next KvK, and often means a kingdom can fight much harder. That is definitely a very good upside to recovery KvKs and is the main goal of them. So when we look at this, a recovery KvK is intended to pretty much allow you to perform better in your next KvK. So this KvK is pretty much going to be a dead one. I know our kingdom, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be here, and I'm sure if I am, the king will comment, we're not actually going to be fighting at all in the KvK, or very, very minimal fighting. So the goal is literally just to farm resources, farm speed ups, and next KvK, smash our enemies. That is pretty much the goal of this KvK, so we can get fully set up. Now, there are other ways you can do recoveries. That is one reason why, me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of these, but that's also because I'm a creator, and these are pretty boring. But one other way you can do recovery is through just skipping KvK signups, like going for about 2 months or so, and usually that is enough time. But if your kingdom had a huge KvK like we did with 1568, this can be another way to extend that recovery time by another 50 to 60 days, so another even 2 months. That is a very, very long time to extend these recoveries by, and they definitely do allow you to really have a very, very stacked account by the time it comes by. I think the best example of this would be 1093. They were just super stacked on resources and stuff just because they were struggling to get a KvK. That's kind of different to recover a KvK, but when you look at the Kingdom 1093 as an example, just because of how much time they had to really recover their accounts to the point they were just inflating in power, the Kingdom was able to enter a KvK and just demolish everybody. They were just so stacked on resources and speed ups, it was like not even funny. So when you look at a KvK like that, it is really, really self-explanatory as to why recovery KvKs are really good. So in terms of kingdoms that are bigger in size, recovery KvKs can really, really help. In smaller kingdoms, it's also really, really good because the less number of players means less speed ups. But if you do a recovery, all the accounts should be in a fairly decent position. And that's why you'll often see some Imperium kingdoms, or most at least, will take a recovery KvK every now and again, or they will take a recovery period where they don't sign up to any KvKs, and sometimes they just won't be able to sign up, like 1093, because the kingdom was just that big. So definitely, recovery KvKs have got a lot of advantages in regard to recovering, and they can also help you kind of have some time to almost weed out deadweight players. Kingdoms that go for recovery often do restructure. I know our kingdom didn't really restructure. I think we had a few people leave, but we didn't have a restructure in leadership per se. But a lot of kingdoms which go for recovery will do a full leadership restructure where they zero out all the deadweights in the kingdom. I know we are doing that, and that will allow them to pretty much consolidate all the power and make sure all the players who are left are active fighting players who are actually willing to recover their account. So as you can see, just as an example right now, we've been killing off tons of deadweight and telling people to leave. I'm rank 154 on the individual power. If we go to the alliance ranking, these are the people in our one kingdom alliance. I'm going to be like rank 142 or something, 143. So really, it's a 10 rank difference. That means there's 10 people above me on the leaderboard who probably shouldn't be there. But other than that, our kingdom has pretty much consolidated all the power into one alliance, and it's allowed us to almost cut our weight a little bit. That means we're going to have a more active player base, hopefully by the time the next KvK does begin. Now that being said, recovery KvKs aren't all jolly and fun, and there are a few disadvantages to them, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about our kingdom's perspective as well as other kingdoms that I have seen in the past. Hopefully the king doesn't get mad that I'm mentioning this, but he shouldn't, and if he did, I'm sorry. But hey, you know what they say, ask for forgiveness after you do it. So the first thing I'm going to say about a disadvantage with recovery KvKs is they're boring. I mean, a recovery KvK quite literally is not fighting and sitting in your city. It's a quite basic, boring concept, and obviously it's like being in an off-season. When you're in off-season, I'm sure you log into the game less, and that's just to be expected, and recovery KvKs are really just like an extended off-season. So they're in off-season with a couple extra gold heads and nice rewards, but without all the fun fighting of Rise of Kingdoms. So they can be really, really boring, and you may see a drop in player activity or just player enthusiasm. That's definitely a big issue with recovery KvKs, I find, keeping morale up. And I know I'll probably end up fighting a little bit, joining other alliances or something just for a little bit to do a bit of fighting, just so I don't get too bored. Because 60 days without any fighting, I mean, it's a long time. So recovery KvKs can be very tedious, they can be very boring, and they can also underinflate a personal account stats. I mean, I've got 1.4 billion kill points. It's not that many for how old my account is. And if I go through a full recovery KvK, it means I'm missing a whole KvK worth of kills. And this account's already missed like 3 KvKs worth of kills just from the early game KvKs I did. So recovery KvKs can really overinflate an account in terms of their age to kill point ratio, and it can make it difficult to find another kingdom. That's definitely a big issue, more on a personal level with an account. Now, that being said, it can kind of be counteracted in a way where you can just fight harder in the next KvK to make up for it. But honestly, for most people, it comes down to a time thing more than a resource thing. I mean, I know I run out of time nowadays before I run out of resources. My account's just that old that I've got tons of resources stored up, so I don't really run out of resources that often. And in terms of speed ups, it's definitely the same story. I didn't even come close to using all my speed ups last KvK. I mean, I used a good chunk of them, maybe about 40 to 50%, but it wasn't all of them. And by the time we had lost Kingsland, I mean, I could try and fight the whales by myself, but that was pretty much over. So it just comes down to the fact that for the average account, recovery KvKs may not do the biggest thing for them, but for the whale accounts and the people who are garrisoning and rallying, the most important accounts if you're being fully realistic, that is where they do really impact you more, and those accounts can often really benefit from those recoveries because you can boost your troops up, get more speed ups. That means you can fill more flags and rally more next KvK, and therefore you can fight more on the normal accounts like mine. But really, for an account like mine, it's a bit of a downside in that regard, where my stats do get a little bit underinflated compared to where they should be. So I would have probably been 1.8 billion kill points after the current KvK that I'm in, maybe 2 billion if I got super lucky, but I doubt that. And that obviously would have been good for my account, but that's not going to happen unless I end up fighting, which I might, but I might not. We'll have to see what happens. So that's definitely a downside to a KvK. That is a recovery one at least. Another one is a lot of people are just against recovery KvKs. They will just leave the kingdom. I know we had one of the bigger players leave because of the recovery KvK. At least that's what I think. I might be wrong there. And I know that we've also had a few other smaller accounts leave here and there. They weren't the biggest deals, those smaller accounts. They're like 50, 60, 70 million power. So you can notice that sometimes for other kingdoms where they're not as on board, because we did do a kingdom vote, most people voted to have a recovery, you would notice that a lot of players are more willing to leave the kingdom than there are people who are willing to come to the kingdom. Sometimes it is a good time to bring in extra migration because there is a KvK where they don't have to fight, and that means the new accounts can build up their resources because when you migrate, you have to get rid of them all. But it can mean that people who are pretty stacked on resources are not really willing to stay in the kingdom. I'm going to show off one of the males. Hopefully, again, no one gets mad at me. One of our bigger players, Geronimo, they went to another kingdom just for a temporary time while we do this recovery KvK. And that really just shows that some people, they're not too interested in waiting for those KvKs. So as you can see here, Geronimo migrated to 1903. They were obviously one of our bigger players. They said they're going to come back. They probably will. I trust them in that regard. They were definitely one of the more OG players in the kingdom, and they migrated just because they want to have a fight in a KvK. Totally fair. And then they'll probably end up coming back after. But that's definitely a rare case. Most people don't leave and then come back after a KvK. So we'll have to see where that goes, really. I mean, it's up to their own choice, and I think it's perfectly fair. And that's definitely pretty surprising. They left and they're going to come back. That's actually a pretty loyal move to do if you're being realistic. But yeah, most people will just leave the kingdom if they end up in a situation where it's a recovery KvK and they don't necessarily need it. They'll just migrate out. And that's been seen in a lot of Imperium kingdoms. The long off seasons, which are almost like recovery KvKs, have actually killed some Imperium kingdoms. I've seen a lot of people wanting to leave 1093 because of it. I've seen quite a few people leave. I forgot which Imperium kingdom was now. It's one of the ones that Chiska was in. Because they couldn't find a KvK, people just started leaving. So definitely that is something that does happen. A lot of people just don't like him. And you can see a big amount of players who may leave the kingdom. But once again, in our kingdom, that's not the biggest of an issue. I know we had a few new players also come in. I don't think this is a new player, but we've had a few new players come into the kingdom. And stuff like that, of course, is good for the kingdom. But people leaving isn't as good unless they're a lower weight player. So definitely that's one of the downsides of recovery. A lot of people can just kind of disagree with them. The last downside to a recovery KvK is the fact that it can kind of put a lot of burden on players to play within the next KvK. I know me personally, between running YouTube channel and doing school, it can be difficult sometimes to get some time to end up fighting. And I'm sure a lot of people agree. They probably have work, family commitments, stuff like that. And really when it comes down to KvK, the biggest issue is more the time commitment than it is the resources and speed up. So it can end up in a situation where people are like, I have all these extra resources from the recovery KvK, I've got all these speed ups, that's nice and dandy, but I don't really have double the time to spend on the KvK to use up these speed ups. Yes, it could mean they fight more recklessly and that can help you win, like just throwing your troops at the enemies. But that being said, it can also mean that people end up not reaching requirements as much because obviously after recovery KvK, requirements would increase just for that temporary KvK after, just because you've got more resources, speed ups, you'd be expected to use them. So that can definitely put more burden on players, and once again, can be a little bit of an issue in a recovery KvK. But that being said, you can sometimes counteract that again by fighting a bit harder or just being a little bit more reckless with your resources and speed ups to reach the kill point and dead goals that you need to. So I think my account, by the time I enter KvK next time, will be 65, maybe even 70 million power, depending on whether or not I choose to train a lot of troops. So that's definitely quite interesting. It's probably the highest power my account has ever been, because it is currently the highest it's ever been right now. I may reach the highest I'll ever reach, around 70 million, and that means I'll have a ton of troops to kill. Usually for me, killing troops isn't a big deal, so I'll probably kill everything I own. But some players, they don't have the time to kill the amount of troops they have, or they just don't have the time to fight as hard as they would want to, and that's why me personally, this is again just a personal thing I have, I prefer those staggered KvKs, where it's like 1 KvK I'm fighting very hard, next KvK I'm fighting very hard, instead of 1 KvK I'm not really fighting, and the next KvK I'm fighting super hard. Sometimes that just doesn't work for a lot of people. This KvK is kind of good for me because I do have a trip coming up and a bunch of commitments that would have blocked me from doing KvK, so I'm not actually upset about this KvK. I voted yes in for it because I was actually pretty happy with the timing of it, but for some people it just may not work. In fact, that the next KvK they do, they have to spend more time on the game, which at that point they may not have, which means that they're going to be a heavier burden on the kingdom because they're going to be higher power, more troops, they're going to have a lot more resources and speed ups they can't use, and it's just going to inflate the matchmaking. So those are definitely big issues with recovery KvKs, and if not managed right, they can kind of ruin a kingdom. But hopefully our kingdom manages it right. We'll have to see where it goes. I do have quite a lot of trust in our king. He's pretty proactive when it comes to leadership, and I think he is pretty good at that. All the kings in the kingdom, I'm pretty sure it's Sleepy here, Nos, and also Cool Kid. So they're all the 3 kings in our kingdom, and the leadership team as well. I mean, they're pretty smart with the stuff they do. So I think this KvK will be fine for us. It's not going to kill the kingdom, but if it's not managed right, those disadvantages, if they're not counteracted, can definitely lead to a massive downturn in the amount of players in the kingdom, or could even kill the kingdom itself, which obviously is no good. So now the final question I would like to answer is, should you do a recovery KvK? And I think the simple answer for me, in most situations, it's kind of a no. Recovery KvKs, you don't see them that much, and it's for a fairly good reason. They've got very few advantages, and a lot of bad things that can go wrong if you do them. Obviously, in some situations, when managed right, recovery KvKs can be good for a kingdom. They can allow a kingdom to really catch back up on speed ups and resources, and actually allow you to fight a proper KvK. I think that if we didn't do a recovery, or at least if we didn't take an extended recovery time, our kingdom wouldn't be able to actually properly fight in the next KvK, just because all our main players were drained to just about nothing worth of troops. I mean, even our king, I think he was like 110 million power before the KvK started, or at least our last KvK, and he's sitting at like something in the 90s now, actually at 90 million. He was 110 million before, so you'll notice recovery KvKs really do allow a kingdom that has been really battered to come back from the dead, but otherwise it can ruin a kingdom. So if recoveries are too common and too frequent, this is the first recovery I've ever done though, but if they're too common and too frequent, they can ruin a kingdom, since people just don't find them fun and they are boring. That being said, if you have got a very heavy KvK that a kingdom has just come out of, I think a recovery KvK isn't too bad. I mean, if you saw my last live streams on the previous KvK, the 1568 Omniarch's Kingdom, then you'll know that we fought like crazy, and pretty much every single account was zeroed. I had pretty much no troops left by the end of it. I couldn't run all 3 of my marches if I had expansions on. So most people's accounts were fairly drained, especially in terms of power. You'll notice our power still is barely back to where it used to be. I mean, we're only at 12 billion. I think we were like 12.6 at the start of the KvK last time. So this recovery KvK is kind of needed, but sometimes they aren't the best move for a kingdom, and like I said, they're very risky to do if you don't have a proper leadership team in place who know what they are doing. So if you do mess those up, they can really hurt a kingdom, and they can lead to, pretty much at the end of the day, destroying a kingdom completely. So that's definitely a huge downside to recovery KvK, and I'm fairly confident it won't happen in 1534, but at the end of the day, you truly do never know. So recovery KvKs, they're a bit of a risk compared to just signing up for a KvK, but that being said, if your kingdom loses 2 KvKs in a row, that's even bigger of a risk to the kingdom. So definitely, recovery KvKs, they're good in some situations, usually after a massive loss when you fought really hard, but they can be dangerous if not managed correctly. Now, if you found today's video interesting, or you just wanted to know a little bit more about recovery KvKs, please do consider subscribing to the channel. I, of course, will be streaming as much of the recovery KvK as I can. And like I mentioned before, I do have a school thing going on in the holidays, which is a few weeks from now. So I might not be able to stream it as much as I would want to, but I will still have live streams and videos about it, and I won't be missing any uploads while I'm gone. So if you want to see more about my recovery KvK, or you want to see my upcoming Mega Archer guide, little hint right there, it's going to be an hour plus video, do consider subscribing to the channel. Your subscription really does support me. I'm obviously not the biggest channel, and I very much appreciate when anyone subscribes. So if you subscribed, a massive thank you to you, and to all the people who have previously subscribed. As always, a humongous thank you to you as well. Now, I just want to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.